Welcome to another one of my projects. Let's see what we're going to do today about this 2015 Lincoln MKZ, and specifically about this mess here. I mean, this is horrendous. Look at this. Brake dust. It's not road grime. This is only after about 4 days, and I do all highway miles. And this thing's been doing that for the last 20,000 miles. I got the car. I don't know the history of it, the service history or anything like that, so I went and I said, well, let me go get OEM brake pads from the dealer. And so I did. Put it in. 20,000 miles later, look at this nonsense. And the rotors are warped. So I had to go and buy new rotors. I bought new rotors, new pads. Not OEM this time, because I believe the OEM pads are actually the problem. They're what's causing this stuff. So let me show you what the real problem is. It's the pads are not releasing the rotor. So you can tell, normally when you got a wheel up like this, you should be able to spin it freely, and you can tell, well, you can't, but I can, how much the pads are grabbing this rotor. In fact, a good way to test it, which I always do, is if you have a wheel up in the air and you bounce it like this, you should be able, the wheel should go bam, 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 real nice and freely. It's barely making it back because it's grabbing it. The pads are still holding on to it. And it's not a caliper, because I actually, when I first had this problem, I rebuilt the caliper. It's just a square cut seal you're replacing there, and the piston moves real nice and free. So that's not the issue, the pads are. Let me take this off and I'll show you what I mean. Alright, so here's the rotor. I pressed the brake pedal, and watch this. Obviously you can't feel it, but that rotor is still, or the pads are still dragging on it. It's very hard to move it. It takes too much force, so you can tell the pads are still clamped on the rotor, even though when you release the brake, this piston inside this caliper does retract a little bit. It's supposed to. It's not a whole lot. I never really measured it, but eyeballing it, probably about maybe 15 thousandths it'll actually release, and that's enough to get the two pads to unclamp the rotor, but it's not. It's still holding it. So it's not the caliper. By the way, I think earlier I said that I had replaced the new pads, about 20K. Well, what I forgot to mention is I also got the rotors resurfaced at the same time, because nobody in their right mind would throw new pads on the old rotors. Well, you could, but you wouldn't be in your right mind. So I had these resurfaced, believe it or not, at a local dealership, at a Nissan dealership out of all the places. Ford wouldn't do it. Not many places would anymore. But they have a guy at Nissan that does a fantastic job. In fact, he took like 3 passes on these, which means he really knows what he's doing, because you have to take off a little bit at a time. So in 20K they got warped, and like I say, I do mostly highway miles. I'm talking about 60-80 miles one way, right? So I barely use the brakes. I'm not on the brakes a lot. I've rebuilt these. I've changed the square cut seal on them when I had done this, because this was bothering me, but it really didn't change anything, so that means this stuff was actually good. The piston is tip-top shape. It's shiny, no scoring or anything of that sort. All it is a square cut seal in there. Replace that, and it's still creating this dust, because I think the problem with these brake pads, even though the piston itself is retracting, the brake pads have these shims on the back of them, metal shims that act like springs. And when I take it off a little bit later, I'm gonna show you what I'm talking about. But all I gotta do is just very gently release it, and the rotor is now unclamped. So that's what the problem is. Now you can still see under there I have a bin with fluid. That's because I already fixed the other side, and I had the caliper on the bench. So stay tuned. We'll take this off and I'll show you where the problem really lies. Alright, so here's the rotor off of that side we were just working on, and it looks decent. You can tell by the looks of it, it looks pretty good. But they are warped, or it is warped, and making a lot of brake dust. No noise, so I can't complain about that. But look at this brake pad here. Now these are the pads that came off of this side with this rotor, and they're not as bad for what I'm going to show you here in a minute. But the other side that I had fixed yesterday, the problem is very apparent. So here's this pad. It has this metal backing plate, as you can see. Well, when I think the manufacture process is faulty, because when these are pushed in, these little dowels to keep this metal backing plate on there, it creates a void in there, right there. Look how bad that is. That's a lot. Now, why is that bad? Because this thing is like a spring. So when you have a piston, brake piston, pushing on this pad, then you let the brake pedal go, the piston retracts a little bit, but it only retracts about 20-30 thousandths, which is all it's going to do, and that's enough to get the pads to release. But this backing plate is like a spring, and it's heavy duty spring. I mean, it's hard for me to even push it to get it to squeeze really well. So piston retracts, but this backing plate is like a spring, and it keeps the pad up against the rotor, and that's what's causing the problem. It's effectively like driving with your foot on the brake very lightly, you know what I mean? And the gap is pretty significant. This is what do I got on here? 15 and the 14, 29. I had like 30 thousandths, and it goes in there very nice and easy. So it's about 30 thousandths. So that's definitely the problem with these pads. And so I went and bought OEM pads, and they're probably not bad, you know, considering it's a pad. I don't know if this is a semi-metallic or the new stuff, ceramic, but this backing plate is the problem. So the new pads that I got also have a backing plate, but it's not metal, it's fiberglass. And this thing is, I think this is going to work out really well. This is kind of like a heavy duty fiber, like a heavy duty gasket type deal. So we'll see how that goes. I fixed the other side yesterday, and it's really nice. I mean, the pads release like they should. So I'm going to install this, and I think that'll take care of this dusting and warping rotor problem. Well, I'm not sure about the warping rotor. I'm still not 100% convinced on that. Some of these rotors they make nowadays is such junk that, you know, they may or may not warp. But if you don't let them overheat, they should last a lot longer. But definitely less brake dust, and that's one of my biggest pet peeves. So I'll let you know how it turns out. Alright, here's the final result. Let's see what we came up with. This is what it looks like, or at least where it should look like when your wheel is free, right? Feel that? So it bounces on the splines back and forth, and I'm just gonna prove it to you. I'm gonna get in, gonna hit the brake pedal nice and tight, 2, maybe even 3 times. Good enough. And the caliper should have released. I'm gonna test that right now. You can take this, or see that? Nice and free. I mean, move it with your hand, but just to kind of prove the point, something consistent you can use. If it bounces like that, you know it's nice and free. So this brake pad problem has been fixed. Now, how long it will last, only time will tell. But I think this is going to be much better now. Alright, well, thanks for watching. Hope this helps somebody.